5 days. That is how long it took the same city to go from throwing its own clothes into the road in front of him to screaming for his execution. The crowd that welcomed Jesus into Jerusalem and the crowd that chose Barabbas were standing in the same streets in the same week during the same festival. Whatever happened on the road down from the Mount of Olives, it did not hold. It could not even hold until Friday. And the strangest part of the story is that he knew. Luke says that while the shouting was at its loudest, while the coats were still going down in the road ahead of him, he was crying. This is the story of the most misunderstood day in the Gospels, a day people picture as a victory parade, and which was, in every deliberate detail, the opposite of one. Start with the timing, because the timing is not incidental. It is the entire reason the day was dangerous. This is Passover week. Jerusalem in the 1st century was a city of perhaps 40,000 people, and at Passover it swelled to something between 200,000 and 400,000. Josephus gives a figure that most historians think is inflated, but even the conservative estimates have the population multiplying 5 or 6 times over in a matter of days. Pilgrims slept on rooftops, in courtyards, in tents on the hillsides outside the walls. Bethany, where Jesus had been staying, was one of the villages absorbing the overflow. Now understand what Passover commemorates. It is the festival of national liberation. It remembers the night God broke a foreign empire's grip on his people and brought them out of slavery. Every family in that city was, that week, retelling a story about God overthrowing an occupying power. And the city was, at that exact moment, occupied. The Romans understood this perfectly. That is why Pontius Pilate was even in Jerusalem. His actual residence was Caesarea Maritima, a pleasant coastal city with a harbor and a Roman theater. He came up to Jerusalem for the festivals, and he did not come alone. He brought troops, and he stationed them in and around the temple precincts, on the roofs of the colonnades, where the crowds could see them. The message was not subtle and was not meant to be. Remember what this week is about. Do not get any ideas. So into that city, in that week, a man rides in from the east, while the governor of Judea rides in from the west, and one of them is deliberately staging something. The staging is the part that gets missed, and it is the key to the whole day. Read the account carefully, and what you find is not a spontaneous outpouring. It is arranged. Jesus stops on the road, sends 2 disciples ahead into a village, and gives them precise instructions. You will find a colt tied, on which never man sat. Loose him and bring him. And if any man ask you, why do ye loose him? Thus shall ye say unto him, because the Lord hath need of him. That is a password. There is no other sensible reading of it. He is telling them what to say to a specific person who is expecting to hear it. Whether this had been arranged days earlier with a supporter in Bethphage, or whether the gospel writers intend it as foreknowledge, the effect on the day is identical. The animal was waiting, and the arrival was planned. Jesus had walked everywhere for 3 years, Galilee to Jerusalem repeatedly on foot. There is no record of him riding anything at any point until this morning. So the question is not why he rode. It is why he rode this once. The answer is in a book written 500 years earlier, and the crowd knew it by heart. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, thy king cometh unto thee. He is just and having salvation, lowly and riding upon an ass, and upon a colt the foal of an ass. Zechariah chapter 9. It is one of the most specific messianic pictures in the Hebrew scriptures, and it is not vague. The king comes to Jerusalem. He comes riding, and he comes on a donkey. To ride into Jerusalem on a donkey during Passover was not humility, or not only humility. It was a claim, made in a language every literate person in that city could read, and made in public on the busiest day of the year. He had spent 3 years telling people not to say who he was. Tell no man, see thou say nothing to any man. He silenced the demons that named him. He swore the 3 on the mountain to silence. And then he sat on a borrowed colt and rode into the capital city, quoting a prophecy about a king. The silence was over. That is what this day is, not a parade, a declaration. But now the detail that changes the meaning of the whole thing, and which a first-century audience would have caught instantly. The donkey is the wrong animal. A conquering king did not ride a donkey. A conquering king rode a horse or was carried in a chariot at the head of his army. That was the visual language of power in the ancient world, and everybody understood it. The Roman triumph, the highest honor the empire could grant a general, was a procession of the victor in a chariot, with the spoils of war carried behind him and the prisoners walking in chains. There is a real chance Jerusalem saw something close to that same week, from the other direction, as Pilate's column came up from the coast. And against that, a man on a young donkey, not a war horse, not even a full-grown animal, a colt, one that had never been ridden. Zechariah knew what he was doing when he chose that image, and the verse after the one everybody quotes makes it explicit. I will cut off the chariot from Ephraim, and the horse from Jerusalem, and the battle bow shall be cut off, and he shall speak peace unto the heathen. The king in that prophecy arrives by disarming. He comes in on the animal you use for peace, not the one you use for war. So Jesus stages a royal entrance and then deliberately gets the props wrong. He accepts the title and rejects the job description in the same gesture. He is saying, in effect, yes, I am the king you have been waiting for, and no, I am not the king you think you are waiting for. It is worth holding those 2 arrivals side by side, because the contrast is the argument. Pilate comes from Caesarea, from the west, along the road up from the sea. He comes with cavalry and with auxiliary infantry, with standards, with the eagle, with leather and polished metal, and the noise a column of armed men makes on a stone road. It is a display, and its purpose is to be seen, an annual reminder, timed precisely for the festival of liberation, of who is actually in charge of this province. Jesus comes from Bethany, from the east, down the Mount of Olives. He comes on a borrowed colt that has never been ridden, surrounded by pilgrims with no weapons, over a road surfaced with other people's coats. One of those processions has the entire military apparatus of the largest empire on earth behind it. The other has a donkey. And the direction is not incidental either. He comes down the Mount of Olives, which is the exact place Zechariah names a few chapters later as where the Lord will stand on the day he intervenes for Jerusalem. Whether the crowd made that connection in the moment we cannot know, but the geography was not neutral ground, and he did not choose it by accident. We should be careful here. This pairing of the 2 processions is a reconstruction. No gospel writer stages it that way, and we do not have a document telling us Pilate rode in on the same morning. What we do have is the practice. Governors came up for the festivals, they brought troops, and they made sure it was noticed. So the two arrivals belong to the same week and the same city, even if we cannot put them in the same hour. The point survives either way, because the point is not really about Pilate. It is about what the crowd was being offered and what they thought they were being offered. Power in that world looked like the thing coming up the Western Road. It looked like cavalry and standards and the capacity to end an argument by force. Everyone in Jerusalem knew what it looked like because it visited them every year. And the man they were crowning had spent 3 years saying that the whole scale was upside down, that the first would be last, that the meek inherit, that the one who wants to be greatest must be a servant, that whoever saves his life loses it. He had said it constantly and in every register, parable, sermon, argument aside. Then he arranged a demonstration of it in public at the largest possible gathering, using the two most legible props available, a prophecy about a king and an animal that no king would ride. It is possibly the clearest thing he ever did, and it was almost universally misread on the day by people who had heard him teach. The crowd took the first half and did not hear the second. Watch what they do. They spread their garments in the way, and others cut down branches from the trees and strewed them in the way. Putting your cloak on the ground in front of someone is not a general gesture of enthusiasm. It has a precedent, and it is a coronation. In the second book of Kings, when Jehu is proclaimed king by the army, the text says, "They hasted and took every man his garment and put it under him on the top of the stairs, and blew with trumpets, saying, 'Jehu is king.'" That is what the crowd is doing on that road. They are crowning him. Not metaphorically, they are performing the physical act associated with making a man king. And the branches carry their own weight. John specifies palm branches, and palms had been a nationalist symbol for 200 years. When the Maccabees drove the Greeks out of the temple and rededicated it, they entered with palm branches. Palms appeared on the coins, the Jewish rebels struck during their revolts against Rome. To wave a palm branch in Jerusalem at Passover was roughly as neutral as waving a flag at a protest. This was a political demonstration. That is not a modern reading imposed on the text. It is what the objects meant to the people holding them. Then there is the word itself. Hosanna is not a cheer. It has been treated as one for so long that it now functions as a synonym for hooray, but the Hebrew behind it, Hosanna, is a petition. It means save now, save please. They were not congratulating him, they were begging him. And the line they attach to it comes from Psalm 118, which was part of the Hallel, the group of psalms sung at the great festivals. Every pilgrim on that road had sung these words at Passover their whole life. Save now, I beseech thee, O Lord. O Lord, I beseech thee, send now prosperity. Blessed be he that cometh in the name of the Lord. So the crowd is quoting the festival liturgy at him and applying it to him personally. They are taking the words they normally sing to God about a coming deliverer and shouting them at a man on a donkey. What did they think was about to happen? Almost certainly this, that he was going to go into that city and do something about Rome. The expectation of the age was for a Messiah in the mold of David or Judas Maccabeus, a military and political deliverer who would end the occupation and restore the kingdom. That hope was not fringe. It was mainstream, and it was fervent, and Passover was when it burned hottest. They were asking to be saved. They simply had a very specific idea of what they needed saving from. and it was wearing armor and standing on the temple roof. The authorities saw exactly what was happening. Some of the Pharisees in the crowd say to him, "Master, rebuke thy disciples." That is not petty, it is closer to a warning. A crowd chanting messianic psalms at a man being crowned in the road, in a city packed with pilgrims and garrisoned by nervous Roman soldiers, is how massacres started. Within 40 years, the pattern would run to its conclusion, and Jerusalem would be destroyed for it. Jesus does not accept the correction. I tell you that, if these should hold their peace, the stones would immediately cry out. There is no room in that answer for the reading where he is an innocent bystander to somebody else's enthusiasm. He is told to stop it. He says it cannot be stopped, and that creation itself would take over if the crowd fell silent. He organized the animal. He fulfilled the prophecy on purpose. He declined to quiet the crowd. Whatever this was, he did it deliberately. And then Luke gives us the detail that makes the day unbearable. And when he was come near, he beheld the city and wept over it. Not a tear. The Greek word Luke uses is the strong one. It means to wail, to sob audibly. This is the same word used for the mourning at a tomb. In the middle of his own coronation, at the point on the road where the whole city comes into view at once, he broke down. And what he says, while weeping, is a prophecy of catastrophe. If thou hadst known, even thou, at least in this thy day, the things which belong unto thy peace, but now they are hid from thine eyes. For the days shall come upon thee, that thine enemies shall cast a trench about thee, and compass thee round, and keep thee in on every side, and shall lay thee even with the ground, and thy children within thee. That is a siege, a trench thrown up around the walls, the city encircled, no one in or out, and then it is leveled. In the year 70, the Roman general Titus besieged Jerusalem. He built a wall of circumvallation around the entire city to stop anyone escaping. Josephus says it went up in 3 days. The siege lasted months. Starvation inside the walls was catastrophic. When the city fell, the temple burned, and the destruction was so complete that the second temple has never been rebuilt. Whatever you make of the prophecy, hold the human picture. He is being crowned by people who want him to fight Rome. He is looking at the city and seeing what happens when it does. And he adds the reason, because thou knewest not the time of thy visitation. Not because they rejected the wrong doctrine, because they did not recognize the moment when it was in front of them. They were looking so hard for one kind of rescue that they could not see another kind standing in the road. That is the emotional center of Palm Sunday, and it is the reason the day is not triumphant. The cheering and the weeping are simultaneous. The crowd has never been louder, and he has never been more alone in what he understands. Now, what actually happened when he got there? This is where Mark does something devastating, and it is almost always skipped. Matthew and Luke move straight from the entry to the cleansing of the temple, which reads as a natural climax. He arrives, he sweeps in, he overturns the tables. Mark, who is generally thought to be the earliest gospel and is not in the business of building drama, tells it differently. And Jesus entered into Jerusalem and into the temple, and when he had looked round about upon all things, and now the eventide was come, he went out unto Bethany with the 12. He arrived, he looked at everything. It was getting late, he left. That is the anticlimax at the end of the parade, and it is the most quietly ominous verse in the passage. The crowd has just crowned him. He walks into the temple, looks around at all of it, says nothing, and goes back out to the village to sleep. Whatever they were expecting to happen that afternoon did not happen. There was no confrontation, no proclamation, no uprising. The action comes the next day, and when it comes, it is aimed not at the Roman garrison, but at the temple's own market. Before we go further, John gives us something the other three do not, and it explains why the crowd was that size in the first place. John says the reason people came out to meet him was Lazarus. Much people of the Jews therefore knew that he was there, and they came not for Jesus' sake only, but that they might see Lazarus also, whom he had raised from the dead. The raising at Bethany had happened weeks earlier, 2 miles from where this road begins, and the city had not stopped talking about it. So the crowd on that road is not a random festival crowd who like the look of a man on a donkey. A significant part of it is there because of a specific, verifiable, recent event that a great many of them had witnessed or knew witnesses to. The people therefore that was with him when he called Lazarus out of his grave and raised him from the dead bear record. That is the engine under Palm Sunday. And John says the authorities understood it exactly that way, because he reports the chief priests deciding to kill Lazarus as well. The only way to deal with the evidence being to remove the evidence. Then John gives their reaction to the entry itself, and it is the most quotable line in the chapter. Perceive ye how ye prevail nothing? Behold, the world is gone after him. That is despair, spoken by people who have run out of options. And John's readers, 40 or 50 years later, would have heard it as an accidental prophecy, because by the time he wrote it down the world had, in fact, gone after him into Syria, Egypt, Asia Minor, and Rome. And then, immediately, John reports something that seems to come out of nowhere. There were certain Greeks among them that came up to worship at the feast. The same came therefore to Philip, and desired him, saying, Sir, we would see Jesus. Greeks, Gentiles in Jerusalem for Passover, asking for an introduction. Philip does not know what to do with the request and fetches Andrew, and the two of them take it to Jesus together, which tells you how unusual it was. And Jesus does not answer the question. He answers something much larger. The hour is come that the Son of Man should be glorified. Every time before this, across the whole of John's Gospel, the phrase has been the opposite. At Cana, mine hour is not yet come. In Galilee, my time is not yet come. Twice in Jerusalem, no man laid hands on him because his hour was not yet come. For 11 chapters, the clock has not started. Gentiles ask to see him, and the clock starts. That is not an accident of arrangement. The moment the message reaches beyond Israel is the moment he declares the hour has arrived, and what he says next makes plain what the hour contains. Verily, verily, I say unto you, except a corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abideth alone. But if it die, it bringeth forth much fruit. He is asked for an audience and responds with an image of burial. A seed kept safe stays exactly one seed. The only way it becomes anything is by going into the ground and being lost. Then, remarkably, now is my soul troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour. But for this cause came I unto this hour. That is Gethsemane, days early in public. In the middle of the week he is being celebrated. He states the prayer and rejects it in the same breath. And then the voice. Father, glorify thy name. Then came there a voice from heaven, saying, I have both glorified it and will glorify it again." This is the third and last time the Father speaks aloud in the Gospels: the baptism, the mountain, and now this. And John records the crowd's reaction, which is the detail I find hardest to forget. "The people therefore that stood by and heard it said that it thundered. Others said, an angel spake to him." They heard it, they just filed it under weather. Standing in the same street at the same moment, hearing the same sound. Some heard God, some heard an angel, and some heard a storm coming in over the hills. Nobody in that crowd was given more evidence than anybody else. They simply did different things with it. And Jesus says, "This voice came not because of me, but for your sakes." It was for them, and most of them looked at the sky and wondered if they should get inside. Think about how that must have landed. If you have spent the morning laying your coat in the road for a man you believe is about to liberate your country, and by evening he has toured the temple like a visitor and gone to bed in Bethany, you have a decision to make about what you actually witnessed. And what he does the following morning is stranger still, and it is the one part of this week that people genuinely struggle with. On the way back into the city on the Monday, he is hungry. He sees a fig tree in leaf at a distance, goes over to it, finds nothing but leaves and curses it. "No man eat fruit of the hereafter forever." Read flatly, that is a man losing his temper with a plant. And Mark makes it worse by adding a line that looks like it undermines the whole episode. For the time of figs was not yet. It was not fig season. The tree had done nothing wrong. But look at where Mark puts it, because Mark is doing something deliberate that he does repeatedly in his gospel. He starts one story, interrupts it with a second, then returns to finish the first, and the two are always meant to interpret each other. The fig tree is cursed. Then Jesus goes into the temple and drives out the traders. Then, the next morning, they pass the fig tree again, and it has withered from the roots. The temple episode is inside the fig tree episode. That is not chronology, that is commentary. And the horticultural detail everybody treats as a problem is actually the point. A fig tree in that region puts out small early fruit, sometimes called breba, at roughly the same time as its leaves, before the main crop. A tree in full leaf is advertising. It is making a claim about what is inside it. So a tree with leaves and nothing else is not simply barren. It is a tree that promised and did not deliver. Which is exactly the charge he then walks into the temple and makes in person. The fig tree had been an image for Israel in the prophets for centuries, in Jeremiah, in Hosea, in Micah, who writes, "There is no cluster to eat. My soul desired the first-ripe fruit." It was not an obscure symbol. It was a standard one. So the sequence reads, "Here is something in full leaf that has no fruit on it. Now watch me go and say the same thing about the temple." And in the temple, the charge is specific. "My house shall be called of all nations the house of prayer, but ye have made it a den of thieves." Of all nations. He is quoting Isaiah, and the phrase matters because the court he is standing in is the court of the Gentiles. The only part of the temple a non-Jew was permitted to enter. That was the one space in the building where the nations could come and pray, and it had been filled with currency exchange and livestock. Remember who had just asked to see him? Greeks in Jerusalem for the feast. They would have been standing in that court, and what was in it was a market. The following morning Peter notices the tree. "Master, behold, the fig tree which thou cursedst is withered away. And Mark notes the detail that finishes the image, dried up from the roots, not wilting from the top, dead from the bottom. Whatever else this week is, it is not a man arriving in a city to be admired. It is a systematic, escalating public statement, and every element of it, the animal, the prophecy, the tree, the tables, is aimed at the same target and read in the same language. Which brings us to the question everybody asks about this week. How does a crowd shouting Hosanna on Sunday shout, Crucify him on Friday? Part of the answer is that they may not be the same crowd. Jerusalem held hundreds of thousands that week. The group on the road from Bethany was largely made up of pilgrims and Galileans, his own people, who had followed him from the north or come out from the city to meet him. The crowd assembled in front of Pilate on Friday morning was a different gathering in a different place, at an hour when most pilgrims would not have been present, and the Gospels say plainly that the chief priests moved among them. But it would be too comfortable to leave it there, because part of the answer is also that disappointed hope curdles fast. The crowd asked to be saved from Rome. He did not do it. He rode in as a king, then declined to act like one, then attacked the temple establishment instead of the occupation, then allowed himself to be arrested without resistance. For someone whose hope was national deliverance, that is not merely a letdown, it looks like a fraud. And a crowd that feels it has been made a fool of is capable of a great deal. Then Pilate offers them a choice, and the choice is pointed in a way that is easy to miss. Barabbas is described by Mark as a man who had committed murder in the insurrection, a rebel taken during an uprising against Rome. So the crowd is offered two prisoners. One of them tried to fight Rome with violence and failed. The other rode into the city on a donkey and refused to fight at all. They chose the fighter. That is the same choice they made on the road, only now it is explicit. They wanted a deliverer with a sword. When they were finally given the option in plain terms, they took the man who had actually picked one up. So what do we do with Palm Sunday? The first thing is to stop reading it as a happy day that went wrong. It was never a happy day. Every element in it is double-edged, and he built it that way. The prophecy he fulfilled is the one about a king who abolishes cavalry. The animal he chose is the one that says this is not a conquest. The word the crowd shouted is a plea, not a compliment. And the man at the center of it was in tears. The second is to notice what he did not do. He did not correct them. He could have stopped on that road and explained that he was not the kind of king they meant, and there is no sign that he did. He let them crown him, wept for them, and rode on into a week that ended on a cross. And I think that is because the two things were never as separate as the crowd assumed. They wanted deliverance from an occupation. He was on his way to a deliverance he considered larger, and the route to it went through the thing they would have called defeat. The third is the line he wept over, "Thou knewest not the time of thy visitation." That is not a complaint about ignorance. It is grief over timing. The thing they had prayed for their entire lives came up that road on a donkey, and they were looking over its shoulder for an army. There is a version of that available to anyone. Asking sincerely for one thing, being answered with something better, and not recognizing the answer because it did not arrive in the shape that was expected. They shouted, "Save now." He was, at that exact moment, on his way to do precisely that. And within the week, almost every one of them concluded he had failed. 5 days between the coats in the road and the crowd in front of Pilate. He knew that when he got on the donkey, he got on anyway. By the time they sat down to eat, one of the men at that table had already been paid. The money was counted, the arrangement was made. Judas had gone to the chief priest's days earlier, agreed a price, and had been looking for a quiet moment ever since. And he spent that evening reclining a few feet from the man he had sold, eating out of the same dish. And Jesus knew. That is the part that makes this meal almost unbearable to read slowly. He knew before they sat down. He says so out loud during the meal, and he still got up partway through, took a towel, knelt on the floor, and washed that man's feet. This is the story of the last few hours before the arrest. A supper that has been painted 10,000 times and is almost always painted wrong, and which contains, in the space of one evening, the most tender thing he ever did and the most catastrophic thing anyone ever did to him. Start with the room, because getting into it was an operation. Jerusalem at Passover was packed, a city of perhaps 40,000 swollen to several 100,000, and finding private space for 13 men to eat a long meal was not simple. Rooms were lent, borrowed, and shared. And this particular group had a specific problem on top of the shortage. The authorities had decided to kill him and were waiting for a moment when the crowds were not around. So look at how the arrangements are made. Jesus sends 2 disciples ahead and gives them instructions that sound like a spy novel. Go into the city, and there shall meet you a man bearing a pitcher of water. Follow him. And wheresoever he shall go in, say ye to the goodman of the house, the master saith, Where is the guest chamber? A man carrying water. In that culture, carrying water from the well was women's work almost without exception. A man doing it in a crowded street would stand out precisely enough to be found, and not enough to be remarked on. It is a recognition signal. And the phrase they are told to use, the master saith, is the same shape as the phrase used to collect the donkey a few days earlier, because the Lord hath need of him. A password spoken to somebody already expecting it. So the venue was arranged in advance, through an intermediary, using a code, in a way that meant not even the 12 knew the address until they got there. That last detail matters more than it looks. If the location had been known that morning, Judas could have told the priests where to find him, and the arrest would have happened during the meal. Instead, it happens later, at a garden, a place Judas knew from habit rather than from being told. The secrecy bought the evening. Now the room itself, and the first thing paintings get wrong. They were not sitting at a long table in a row. First-century formal meals in that world were eaten reclining. Guests lay on their left side on low couches arranged around 3 sides of a low table, propped on the left elbow, eating with the right hand, feet pointing away from the table. That arrangement is called a triclinium, and it is why the Gospel says John was lying on Jesus' breast. Not an odd display of affection, but the ordinary posture of the man in the next place, whose head would naturally be near the chest of the person to his left. And this matters because the places were ranked. Reclining order was social order, and everybody knew where they had been put. Which produces one of the quietest and most devastating details in the whole account. John is at his right. And for Jesus to hand Judas a piece of food directly, without stretching, Judas has to be close too. Most reconstructions put him at the other side, in the second place of honor, the seat you gave the guest you wished to single out. If that is right, then Jesus did not merely fail to expose the man who had sold him. He seated him next to himself. Then, in the middle of the meal, he does something that stopped the room. Jesus riseth from supper, and laid aside his garments, and took a towel, and girded himself. After that he poureth water into a basin, and began to wash the disciples' feet. You have to understand how far down that is. Washing feet was necessary. Roads were dust and dung, sandals were open, and you did not recline at a table with the filth of the street on your feet next to somebody's face. So it was always done. It was simply never done by anyone who mattered. It was slave work, and specifically the lowest slaves' work. There is rabbinic material indicating a Hebrew slave could not be compelled to do it. The job was given to gentle slaves, or to women, or to children. It was the bottom of the household. And that is the job he took in the middle of the meal, wearing a towel, on the floor, in front of the men who had spent the last week arguing about which of them was the greatest. Peter refuses. Of course he does. Thou shalt never wash my feet. It reads as humility, and it is really something closer to panic. Peter cannot make the picture work. The man he has confessed to be the Christ is on the floor with a basin, and every instinct Peter has about how the world is ordered says, stop this. And the answer he gets is not gentle. If I wash thee not, thou hast no part with me. That is a hard sentence, and it is the theological center of the evening. Peter is not being told to accept a kindness. He is being told that there is no version of this where he keeps his dignity and keeps Jesus, that the whole arrangement runs one way, from the one kneeling to the one seated, and that refusing to be served is refusing the thing itself. Peter, being Peter, overcorrects immediately. Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. And then, in the middle of that, a line lands like a dropped glass. He said, Ye are not all clean. John adds the explanation for the reader, for he knew who should betray him. Therefore said he, Ye are not all clean. So the feet he had just washed included the feet of the man who had already taken the money. He knelt in front of Judas. He held that man's feet in his hands and washed them and dried them with the towel round his waist and said nothing to the others. Whatever else you take from this evening, take that. There is no record of him refusing, no record of a private word, no record of him even letting the rest of the room know. The betrayal was already paid for, and he washed his feet anyway. Then he sits back down and tells them what it was for. Know ye what I have done to you? Ye call me Master and Lord, and ye say, well, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and Master, have washed your feet, ye also ought to wash one another's feet. He does not soften the titles. He accepts both of them, Master, Lord, and says so is right, and then defines what they mean by pointing at the basin. The authority is real. The expression of it was the flaw. And out of that comes the instruction he calls new. A new commandment I give unto you, that ye love one another, as I have loved you. The commandment to love your neighbor was not new. It is in Leviticus. What is new is the measure. Not as you love yourself, as I have loved you. And the demonstration of that standard had happened about 10 minutes earlier, with a towel in front of the man who was going to hand him over before morning. Now the announcement, and the reaction to it, is the strangest thing in the chapter. Verily I say unto you, that one of you shall betray me. And they were exceeding sorrowful, and began every one of them to say unto him, Lord, is it I? Every one of them. Not one man turns and looks at Judas. Nobody says a name. 11 men who had lived alongside these people for 3 years, hearing that one of the group is a traitor, and the universal reaction is to examine themselves. 2 things follow from that. The first is about Judas. He had given nothing away. No coldness, no distance, nothing anyone had noticed. Whatever happened inside that man happened invisibly. The second is about the 11, and it is the more uncomfortable one. Not one of them was certain it was not him. They each thought it was at least possible that they were the one, which, given that within hours all of them would run, and one of them would deny knowing him 3 times, was a more accurate self-assessment than they realized. Then John gives us the private exchange. Peter, unable to ask directly, signals across to John to find out. John, next to Jesus, leans back and asks quietly, Lord, who is it? And the answer is given in an action rather than a name. He it is, to whom I shall give a sop when I have dipped it. A sop is a piece of bread dipped in the dish, and handing it to a guest was not an accusation, it was the opposite. It was a mark of favor, the host singling out someone for honor. So the sign identifying the traitor was a gesture of affection, given openly at the table, and it was so unremarkable as a gesture that nobody at that table understood what they had just seen. The text says so plainly. Now no man at the table knew for what intent he spake this unto him. He identified the betrayer by honoring him, and the room read it as ordinary courtesy. And after the sop Satan entered into him, then said Jesus unto him, That thou doest, do quickly. Judas goes, and John ends the sentence with 4 words that do more work than any description could. He then, having received the sop, went immediately out, and it was night. It was night. John has been using light and darkness since his first chapter, and he does not explain it here. He just closes the door and lets the dark stand there. Now the part everything else has been building towards, and it is startlingly brief. And as they did eat, Jesus took bread and blessed and brake it and gave to them and said, Take, eat, this is my body. Consider what those words did in that room, on that night, at that meal. Passover is a scripted meal. It is not an ordinary dinner that happens at a particular time of year. It is a liturgy with fixed foods and fixed questions and fixed explanations, and every man at that table had eaten it every year of his life. The unleavened bread had a meaning, and the meaning was given in a set form. This is the bread of affliction which our fathers ate in the land of Egypt. The bread pointed backwards to the Exodus every single year without exception. And in the middle of the fixed liturgy, at the point where the explanation was supposed to come, he changed it, not backwards to Egypt, to himself. This is my body. That is not a small edit. It is a man taking the national memorial of God's rescue of his people and saying, in effect, that it was about him. Nobody at that table had any category for it, and the Gospels do not record a single question in response, which may be the most telling detail of all. They had stopped being able to keep up. Then the cup. And he took the cup and gave thanks and gave it to them, and they all drank of it. And he said unto them, This is my blood of the New Testament, which is shed for many. The Passover meal used 4 cups, taken at set points. Most reconstructions place this as the third, the cup of redemption, which follows the meal, and Luke's ordering, likewise also the cup after supper, fits that exactly. And the phrase he attaches to it is covenant language, not ordinary speech. Blood of the New Testament, New Covenant, reaches straight back to Jeremiah, who had promised a day when God would make a new covenant with his people, not according to the covenant made when he brought them out of Egypt, written not on stone, but inward on the heart. So within about a minute, he has taken the two central objects of the meal and reassigned them both, and the second reassignment claims that the covenant of Sinai is being replaced. There is also something missing from every account, and once you notice it, you cannot stop noticing it. Nobody mentions the lamb. A Passover meal has a lamb at the center of it. That is the whole point, an animal killed so that death would pass over the house. All four Gospels describe this supper, 3 of them in detail, and not one records him saying a word about the lamb on the table. He talks about the bread, he talks about the cup, the lamb goes unexplained. You can read that as an accident of reporting. Or you can read it the way John seems to, since John, who never describes the bread and the cup at all, is the one who has the Baptist point at Jesus in the very first chapter and say, "Behold the Lamb of God, which taketh away the sin of the world." And John is also the one who places the crucifixion at the hour the Passover lambs were being killed. And that brings us to the oldest argument about this evening, which is whether it was a Passover meal at all. Matthew, Mark, and Luke say it plainly. Mark, the first day of unleavened bread, when they killed the Passover, the disciples ask where to prepare it. The whole scene is set inside the festival. John says something that will not fit with that. He has the priests, on the morning of the crucifixion, refusing to enter Pilate's headquarters lest they should be defiled, but that they might eat the Passover. If they had not yet eaten it on the morning Jesus died, then the supper the night before was not the Passover meal. And John also dates the crucifixion to the preparation of the Passover, the afternoon the lambs were slaughtered. So one tradition has him eating the Passover and dying the next day. The other has him dying at the hour the lambs died, with the meal happening beforehand. That is a real discrepancy in a document set that is otherwise carefully harmonized, and it has occupied scholars for centuries. The proposed resolutions are worth knowing, because each one tells you something about the world the story sits in. Some argue for different calendars running at once. There is decent evidence that not every Jewish group in the 1st century kept the same reckoning. The community at Qumran used a solar calendar that put festivals on different days from the temple's lunar one. So a Galilean group and the Jerusalem priesthood could genuinely have kept Passover a day apart, both sincerely. Others point out that the sheer logistics forced staggering. Josephus gives numbers for the lambs slaughtered at Passover that, whatever the exaggeration, describe an impossible crush in a single afternoon at a single temple. Some spreading of the observance is likely simply because the building could not process everyone at once. And others take John's dating as theological rather than calendrical, that he has placed the death at the hour of the lambs deliberately, because that is his argument, and that precision of that kind was not what an ancient writer meant by accuracy. I do not think we can settle it, and I would be suspicious of anyone who says they can. But notice that both versions are making the same claim by different routes. The synoptics say he took the Passover meal and put himself at the center of it. John says he died at the moment the Passover lambs were being killed. Neither is arguing that he was near the lamb. Both are arguing that he was it. Now, something happened at that table that the polite retellings tend to leave out. Luke records it in one flat sentence, straight after the bread and the cup, and there was also a strife among them, which of them should be accounted the greatest. An argument about rank, at that meal, after the basin and the towel, minutes after being told that one of them would hand him over. It is almost too on the nose to be invented, which is a decent argument for it being reported rather than composed. 12 men have just watched their teacher wash their feet, and their response is to resume a dispute about seniority, very possibly a dispute about the seating, since the couches were ranked and everyone could see who had been put where. His answer does not scold them. It redefines the currency. The kings of the Gentiles exercise lordship over them. But ye shall not be so. But he that is greatest among you, let him be as the younger, and he that is chief as he that doth serve. For whether is greater, he that sitteth at meat, or he that serveth? Is not he that sitteth at meat? But I am among you as he that serveth. He is not telling them to want less. He is telling them the scale is inverted and pointing at himself as the evidence, which, given he had just been on the floor with their feet in his hands, was not an abstract claim. Then, a few verses later, one of the odder exchanges in the Gospels. He tells them the situation has changed, that the days of walking into a village and being fed by strangers are over, and that they should now expect hostility. And he says, He that hath no sword, let him sell his garment and buy one. They answer, Lord, behold, here are 2 swords. And he says, It is enough. 2 swords between 13 men. On the night, an armed detachment comes to arrest them. As a military preparation, it is absurd, and it is very hard to read the reply as anything but the closing of a conversation that has gone wrong. Enough of this, in the sense of let it drop, which is confirmed within hours, when Peter actually uses one of those 2 swords in the garden, takes a man's ear off, and is told to put it away and heal the damage. If the instruction had been literal, that was the moment it would have been vindicated. Instead, it is countermanded on the spot. And finally, there is Judas, and the question nobody can answer. Why? The Gospels give motives that do not sit comfortably together. John says he was a thief who carried the common purse and helped himself to it, which makes it sordid and simple. Matthew records him asking a price and being weighed 30 pieces of silver, a sum that is itself a quotation, being the compensation set in Exodus for a slave gored by an ox, and the exact figure thrown to the potter in Zechariah. Luke and John both reach past motive entirely and say Satan entered him. And people have proposed kinder theories for 2,000 years, that he was a zealot disappointed by a Messiah who would not fight, that he was trying to force a confrontation and expected Jesus to win it, that he never intended a death at all. The honest answer is that the texts do not tell us, and the loudest evidence against every tidy theory is what he did next. Matthew says that when he saw the sentence, he repented himself, tried to give the money back, was refused, threw it into the temple and hanged himself. Whatever he thought he was buying, it was not that. Which leaves the 2 men who failed him that night side by side, and the comparison is the reason the story keeps its grip. Both betrayed him within hours. Both were sorry. One went out into the dark and ended it. The other wept, and was asked 3 times on a beach whether he loved him, and was given the church. The difference was not the size of the failure, it was what each of them did with it afterwards. Then, as the meal winds down, he tells Peter what is coming, and Peter does not believe him. "Simon, Simon, behold, Satan hath desired to have you, that he may sift you as wheat. But I have prayed for thee, that thy faith fail not." Note the shape of that. He does not say the sifting will be prevented. He says he has prayed that the faith survive it. And then he adds a sentence that assumes the failure and looks straight past it. "When thou art converted, strengthen thy brethren." Before Peter has denied anything, he has already been given his job for afterwards. Peter answers with the line every one of us would have used. "Lord, I am ready to go with thee, both into prison and to death." And gets the plainest possible reply. "The cock shall not crow this day, before that thou shalt thrice deny that thou knowest me." Matthew adds that all of them said the same thing. Likewise also said all the disciples. The whole room swore loyalty, hours before the whole room ran. And then, knowing all of it, he spends what is left of the evening comforting them. That is the shape of the next few chapters in John, and it is worth stating plainly, because it inverts what you would expect. The man facing arrest, trial, flogging, and execution before the next Sunday spends his last 3 hours reassuring the people who are about to abandon him. "Let not your heart be troubled. Ye believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I will not leave you comfortless. I will come to you. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give unto you. Not as the world giveth, give I unto you." Every one of those is said to men who will be gone by dawn. He knows it, he has just said so out loud, and he comforts them anyway, in the same register he used with the basin and the towel. He also gives them an image that evening which has outlasted almost everything else he said, and it is agricultural rather than religious. "I am the true vine, and my Father is the husbandman. Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself, except it abide in the vine, no more can ye, except ye abide in me." Every man in that room had seen vines pruned. It is not a gentle process. You cut hard, and you cut healthy wood, and a vine that is not cut produces leaf and very little fruit. He uses that, including the uncomfortable half. Every branch that beareth fruit, he purgeth it, that it may bring forth more fruit. The pruning is not punishment for failing. It happens to the branches that are working. And the demand in it is small and total at the same time. Not achieve, not strive. Abide, stay attached. Without me ye can do nothing. Then he promises them something to replace himself, which is the strangest gift in the evening. "I will pray the Father, and he shall give you another comforter, that he may abide with you forever." The word behind comforter is parakletos, one called alongside. It carries the sense of an advocate, someone who stands with you when you are in trouble, and the English word comforter has softened it considerably. He is not promising them consolation. He is promising them representation. And he tells them extraordinarily that this is an improvement. "It is expedient for you that I go away. For if I go not away, the Comforter will not come unto you." Sit with how that would have sounded. Their entire world is the physical presence of this man. He has just told them he is leaving, that one of them is a traitor and another will deny him, and now he says his departure is to their advantage. There is no record of anyone agreeing. And then, before they leave, he prays out loud in front of them, the longest recorded prayer he ever prays, and almost none of it is about himself. He asks first for the hour that is coming. Then he turns to the 11. I pray for them. I pray not for the world, but for them which thou hast given me. He asks that they be kept, that they be one, that they be protected from the evil. And he says, of the men who are about to scatter, I have kept them, and none of them is lost, but the son of perdition. And then the prayer widens, in a way that ought to stop anyone reading it. Neither pray I for these alone, but for them also which shall believe on me through their word. He is praying in that room hours before the arrest, for people who did not exist yet, for everyone who would ever come to believe any of this, because these 11 frightened men eventually told somebody. Which means the last extended thing he did before walking out to be arrested was to pray for the audience of the story in advance, by name of category, if not of person. Whatever you make of the theology, as a piece of composure, it is almost incomprehensible. Then the meal ends, and Mark records the last ordinary thing that happens. And when they had sung an hymn, they went out into the Mount of Olives. They sang. The hymn at the close of Passover was the Hallel, the last part of Psalms 113 to 118, the same collection the crowd had been shouting at him from the roadside 5 days earlier. Which means the last thing he sang, walking out to be arrested, included these lines. The stone which the builders refused is become the headstone of the corner. This is the Lord's doing. It is marvelous in our eyes. And a few verses before it, I shall not die, but live, and declare the works of the Lord. He sang that and walked to the garden. There is one more line, spoken at the very start of the meal, that changes the color of everything that follows it. Luke puts it first, before the bread, before the basin, before any of it. With desire I have desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. The construction is a Hebrew one, a verb doubled for emphasis, the way you might say I have longed and longed. It is not a polite remark about enjoying company. It is the strongest available way of saying he wanted this. Hold that against what he knew was in the room. He wanted to eat this meal with these 12, one of whom had taken money for him, all of whom would be gone within hours, on the last free evening of his life. Not endured, wanted. And it reframes the foot washing, the bread, the prayer and the singing as things done gladly rather than bravely. There is a version of this evening where a man grits his teeth through a final obligation with people who are about to let him down. That is not the version any of the 4 accounts give. It also explains something about the instruction attached to the bread, which Luke and Paul both record and which is easy to skate past. This do in remembrance of me. He is not only reinterpreting the meal, he is asking them to keep doing it. On the night he is handed over, having just told them the group is about to fall apart, he gives them something to repeat, a physical, repeatable action that requires more than one person and a table. Whatever else that is, it is an assumption that there will be an afterwards. He is issuing an instruction to a community that does not yet exist, about a practice they will keep. On the evening, the 11 of them scatter. And there is a piece of evidence about that instruction which is easy to miss, because it sits outside the Gospels entirely. The earliest written account of this meal is not in Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. It is in a letter Paul wrote to the church at Corinth, and most datings put it in the mid-50s. a decade or two before the earliest gospel was written down. For I have received of the Lord that which also I delivered unto you, that the Lord Jesus, the same night in which he was betrayed, took bread. And when he had given thanks, he brake it, and said, Take, eat. This is my body, which is broken for you. This do in remembrance of me. Look at the framing. Received and delivered, the standard vocabulary for handing on a fixed tradition, not for reporting news. Paul is not telling the Corinthians something they have never heard. He is correcting how they are doing something they already do, and quoting back to them a formula they already know. Which means that within roughly 20 years of the event, while people who had been in the room were still alive, the words spoken at that table were already a set text, already being repeated in churches hundreds of miles from Jerusalem, already familiar enough that a letter could quote them as a reminder. The reason he brings it up at all is almost comically ordinary. The Corinthians had been holding the meal badly, the wealthy arriving early and eating well, the poor turning up later to nothing, some drunk. Paul's complaint is not liturgical, but social, that a meal whose whole meaning is a man serving the people beneath him had become an occasion for the well-off to eat in front of the hungry. So the very first surviving mention of the Last Supper, anywhere, is somebody pointing out that the church had already got it backwards. That is oddly reassuring, and it says something about the instruction itself. It was given to people who would misunderstand it within a generation, and it survived them. It has now been repeated, in one form or another, every week somewhere in the world for 2,000 years. An unbroken chain of people doing the same small thing with bread and a cup, which began in a borrowed room, arranged by password. On the night the man at the center of it was sold by a friend for the price of a slave. So what do we do with this evening? The first thing is to stop treating the foot washing as an illustration. It is not a lesson attached to the meal. It is the meal's argument performed before it is explained. He tells them what greatness looks like by getting on the floor, and only afterwards puts words to it. And the words he chooses are not advice. Ye also ought. The second is Judas, and the temptation to make him a monster so the story is easier. The room could not spot him. 11 men who knew him could not, and when told there was a traitor among them, each suspected himself first. Whatever he did it while looking exactly like everybody else at the table, and he was handed bread as an honored guest by the man he had sold, and still went out into the dark. The third is the thing I keep coming back to, which is the ordering of it all. He knew about Judas before the meal began. He knew about Peter before Peter promised. He knew what the next 18 hours held in detail, and had said so repeatedly to a group who kept not hearing it. And with all of that known, he washed their feet, fed them, comforted them, and sang. There is no version of this evening in which he is surprised, which means every act of tenderness in it was a decision, made with the full information about people who were about to fail him completely. And the fourth is the smallest thing in the room, which is the towel. He laid aside his garments and girded himself with it, and when he had finished, he took his garments again and sat back down. The account bothers to record both halves of that, the putting off and the taking up, as though the writer wanted it understood that this was something he chose to put on and chose to remove, rather than a station he was reduced to. He was never not the person at the head of that table. He simply spent part of the evening on the floor. One of the men at that table had already been paid. He washed his feet first. The first thing anyone thought standing in front of that open tomb was not that he had risen. It was that somebody had stolen the body. That is the reaction the Gospels record. Not joy, not recognition, not even hope. A woman running back through the dark to say, "They have taken away the Lord out of the sepulchre, and we know not where they have laid him." And the second thing worth knowing before we start is who was standing there: women. In 1st century Judea, a woman's testimony carried little or no weight in a court. Josephus says plainly that it should not be admitted on account of the levity and boldness of their sex. It was a legal disadvantage, everybody understood. So, if you were constructing a story to persuade a skeptical 1st century audience, you would not have women find the tomb. You would have Peter find it, or John, or a Roman soldier, somebody whose word would stand up. Every gospel puts women there first. This is the story of that morning, and of a set of small, awkward, unhelpful details that are very difficult to explain as invention, because no one constructing a case for a skeptical audience would ever have chosen to include them. Start with the burial, because the burial is why anybody was there at all. Jesus died on a Friday afternoon, and the Sabbath began at sunset. That gave them a few hours. Joseph of Arimathea, a member of the council, asked Pilate for the body, which took nerve, since he was requesting the corpse of a man executed for sedition and identifying himself as a sympathizer in the process. Nicodemus came with him, bringing a very large quantity of myrrh and aloes. They wrapped the body and laid it in a new tomb cut out of rock and rolled a stone across the entrance. And then they had to stop because the sun was going down. That is the crucial thing. The burial was interrupted. It was done properly enough to be respectful and not properly enough to be finished, and everybody involved knew it. Which is why, the moment the Sabbath ended, women who had watched where he was laid came back with spices to complete what Friday had not allowed. They are not going to a resurrection. They are going to a body. That is the entire content of their expectation, and it is written into the fact that they brought ointment. Mark gives us their conversation on the way, and it is wonderfully ordinary. And they said among themselves, "Who shall roll us away the stone from the door of the sepulchre?" They have thought about the spices, the timing, the walk in the half-dark. They have not solved the actual problem. A blocking stone for a rock-cut tomb was a disc of limestone that could weigh a ton or more, set in a channel so that it rolled downhill into place, easy to close, extremely hard to open, and deliberately so. 3 women at dawn, discussing a stone they cannot possibly move, walking towards it anyway. Matthew adds something the others do not, that the chief priests had asked Pilate for a guard, because they remembered that Jesus had said he would rise after 3 days, and they wanted the tomb secured against his disciples stealing the body. Pilate gave them a watch, and the stone was sealed. Whatever you make of that detail, notice what it concedes. The authorities expected a stolen body claim. They took steps against it in advance. It is a piece of evidence that the resurrection story was anticipated by its opponents before there was anything to oppose. And then the women arrive, and the stone is already gone. Now watch what happens next, because it is not what a triumphant ending looks like. Mary Magdalene does not investigate. She does not look inside. She turns and runs, and what she says when she reaches Peter and John is an accusation of theft. They have taken away the Lord out of the sepulchre, and we know not where they have laid him. They, somebody. Grave robbery was common enough that the assumption was reasonable, and there is even an imperial inscription, the so-called Nazareth Decree, threatening capital punishment for disturbing tombs, which some have connected to exactly this kind of trouble. Her mind goes to the ordinary explanation, immediately and without difficulty. That is what makes her a good witness. She is not primed for a miracle. Then comes the foot race, and John, writing decades later, still cannot resist telling you who won. So they ran both together, and the other disciple did outrun Peter and came first to the sepulchre. It is such a human sentence. An old man recording the most significant morning in human history and quietly noting that he was faster. But he stops at the entrance. He stoops down, looks in, sees the linen clothes lying, and does not go in. Peter, characteristically, arrives second and walks straight past him into the tomb. And what they find inside is the strangest evidence in the whole account. Then cometh Simon Peter following him, and went into the sepulchre, and seeth the linen clothes lie, and the napkin that was about his head, not lying with the linen clothes, but wrapped together in a place by itself. The grave clothes are still there, and they are not thrown about. Think about what theft looks like. If you are stealing a body at night against a guard at risk of execution, you take the body as it lies. You do not stop in a dark tomb to unwrap a corpse coated in something like 100 pounds weight of myrrh and aloes, a substance that sets over time into a solid mass around the linen. You would need tools and hours, and you would be carrying away the one thing that made the body identifiable while leaving behind the expensive burial cloth. And the head cloth is described with strange care, not lying with the linen clothes, but wrapped together in a place by itself, folded or rolled and set apart. Whatever happened in that tomb, it was not hurried, and nobody was panicking. And John says, "Then went in also that other disciple, which came first to the sepulchre, and he saw and believed." Believed what exactly? The next verse is careful, for as yet they knew not the scripture that he must rise again from the dead. He believed before he understood. He looked at how the cloths were lying and concluded something the scriptures had not yet explained to him. Then the two of them go home. That is the actual next verse. They went away again unto their own home, which is such an anticlimax that it reads as reported rather than composed. But Mary stays. Mary stood without at the sepulchre weeping. Everyone else has come, looked, and left. She has nowhere to go because she is not there to verify a claim. She is there because the body of someone she loved has been taken, and she does not know where. And she stoops down and looks in, and there are two angels sitting where the body had been, one at the head and one at the feet. Now, if you have any expectation of how such a scene should go, this is where it collapses. She is not frightened. She does not fall down. She answers their question like someone too exhausted to be astonished. "Woman, why weepest thou?" "Because they have taken away my Lord, and I know not where they have laid him." That is the third time she has said the same sentence. Grief has reduced her to one idea, and she repeats it to disciples, to angels, and in a moment, to a man she assumes is the gardener. She turns round, and Jesus is standing there, and she does not recognize him. That is not a small detail either, and it happens more than once that week. The pair on the road to Emmaus walk and talk with him for hours without knowing him. The accounts are oddly insistent that the risen Jesus was not immediately recognizable. which is a strange thing to invent if your purpose is to make the story convincing. Supposing him to be the gardener, she says, "Sir, if thou have borne him hence, tell me where thou hast laid him, and I will take him away." Consider what she is offering. She believes she is speaking to a workman who has moved a body. She is a woman, alone, at dawn, proposing to carry a grown man's corpse away by herself. It is not a practical plan. It is what love says when it has run out of options. And then he says one word. Jesus saith unto her, Mary. Her name, not an explanation, not a proof, not a display, just her name, and she knows him instantly. She turned herself and saith unto him, Rabboni, which is to say, Master. John leaves the word in Aramaic, Rabboni. He is quoting what she actually said, in the language she said it in, which is what people do when they are reporting rather than composing. And then the instruction that has puzzled readers for 2,000 years. Touch me not, for I am not yet ascended to my Father. The older translation makes it sound like a rebuff, and it almost certainly is not. The Greek is closer to stop clinging to me, or do not go on holding me, a present imperative about an action already in progress. She has taken hold of him and is not letting go, which is the most understandable reaction in the Gospels. And the reason he gives is not that she is unworthy or unclean. It is that there is something she has to do first, and holding on will keep her from it. Go to my brethren, and say unto them, I ascend unto my Father and your Father, and to my God and your God. Note what he calls them. My brethren of the men who had run from the garden, and in one case, denied knowing him 3 times in a courtyard, not my disciples, not my followers, brothers. So Mary Magdalene becomes the first person to be sent with the news. Every account of the resurrection that has ever been preached descends, at some remove, from a woman running back into Jerusalem to tell 11 frightened men that she had seen him. And here is where the legal point becomes unavoidable. In a culture where a woman's testimony was treated as unreliable in court, this is the last narrative choice a fabricator would make. It hands the opposition their argument for free. Celsus, writing against Christianity in the 2nd century, does exactly what you would expect and dismisses the whole thing on the grounds that it rests on a hysterical female. If the church had invented the story, it had every incentive to put Peter at the tomb first, and no incentive at all to put Mary there. It is what historians sometimes call an embarrassing detail, the sort of thing a tradition preserves not because it helps, but because it is what happened, and everybody already knew it. And the disciples' own reaction is preserved with the same lack of flattery. Luke and their words seemed to them as idle tales, and they believed them not. The word Luke uses is a medical one. It appears in ancient physicians writing for the ravings of the delirious. The first Christians did not believe the first Christian sermon. 11 men who had spent 3 years being told this would happen heard the news and concluded the women were talking nonsense. That is not the reaction of a group primed to see what they wanted to see. It is the reaction of people who had watched a public execution and drawn the obvious conclusion from it. Then there is Matthew's account of what happened to the guard, which is the most quietly devastating passage of the 4. The soldiers go into the city and report to the chief priests. The priests take counsel, give them a large sum of money, and instruct them. Say ye, his disciples came by night and stole him away while we slept. Look at the shape of that explanation. It requires the guards to testify to something that happened while they were unconscious. It is the only story available to people who cannot produce a body, and it concedes everything that matters, that the tomb was empty and that nobody could account for it. Matthew adds that the story was still circulating when he wrote. He is not reporting a rumor. He is answering the standing counter-explanation of his own day. And what he is effectively saying is, yes, that is what they say, and here is why they had to say it. Which brings us to the honest limit of all of this. An empty tomb by itself proves nothing. Bodies go missing. Every one of the natural explanations, theft, the wrong tomb, an unfinished burial, a plot, was available to the people standing there, and at least one of them was the first thing Mary Magdalene thought of. The empty tomb is not the claim. It is a problem that requires a claim. And it is worth being clear that the earliest opponents never disputed it. That is the striking thing about the counter-story Matthew records. The authorities did not say the tomb was occupied, or produce the body, or point anybody towards it, which would have ended the movement in an afternoon and cost them nothing. They said the disciples took him. An argument about who emptied the tomb is an argument that concedes the tomb was empty. The dispute in the first century was never about the fact. It was about the explanation. That is a narrower disagreement than most people assume, and it is the ground on which everything since has been argued. What turned it into something the early church would die for was not the absence in the tomb but the appearances. To Mary, to Peter, to the 2 walking to Emmaus, to the 11 in a locked room, to Thomas 8 days later, and Paul says, writing within a couple of decades, to over 500 at once, most of whom were still alive and could be asked. That last detail is an invitation to check. It is the sort of thing you write when you expect to be tested, not when you hope not to be. The appearances are worth walking through, because each one has a detail that is hard to account for as invention. Start with the road to Emmaus, which is the longest and the oddest. 2 followers, one named Cleopas, one not named at all, are walking the 7 miles out of Jerusalem on the Sunday afternoon, and a stranger falls into step with them. Luke says their eyes were holden that they should not know him, and they talk for hours. He asks what they are discussing, and they stop, sad, and one of them says a line that ought to be famous. Art thou only a stranger in Jerusalem, and hast not known the things which are come to pass there in these days? Then they explain the crucifixion to Jesus. And what they say is a small masterpiece of disappointed hope, but we trusted that it had been he which should have redeemed Israel. Past tense, we trusted. They are describing a belief they used to hold. They even report the empty tomb. The women went, found it empty, saw a vision of angels, and then add, but him they saw not. The evidence has reached them, and it has not moved them. If anything, it has made things worse. Now the body is missing as well. He walks with them all afternoon and explains the scriptures, and they still do not know him. And at the table, when he takes bread and blesses it and breaks it, their eyes are opened and he vanishes. Then the detail that gives the whole scene away as memory rather than construction. They say to each other, did not our heart burn within us while he talked with us by the way? It is the sentence of people reinterpreting an afternoon after the fact. Nobody inventing a resurrection appearance writes the recognition as retrospective. They walk the 7 miles back to Jerusalem that same night, after dark, on a road nobody traveled after dark, because some news cannot wait until morning. Then the locked room. John dates it to the evening of the same day and specifies why the doors were shut, for fear of the Jews. These are men expecting arrest. The movement's leader has been executed as a rebel, and the reasonable assumption is that they are next. Jesus comes and stands in the middle of them and says, "Peace be unto you." And then he shows them his hands and his side. That is a strange gesture, unless you take seriously what it implies, that the body standing in the room was continuous with the body that had been nailed to the cross. Not a spirit, not a vision, not a replacement. The wounds are the proof of identity, and they are still there. Luke's version is blunter still. He says they were terrified and supposed they had seen a spirit, and he answers by inviting them to handle him. "A spirit hath not flesh and bones, as ye see me have," and then asks whether they have anything to eat, and eats a piece of broiled fish in front of them. Whatever that is, it is not the language of a group inventing a spiritual metaphor. It is oddly, insistently physical, and it is the sort of thing that would embarrass a later theologian rather than help him. Then Thomas, who was not there. The others tell him, and he refuses them flatly. "Except I shall see in his hands the print of the nails, and put my finger into the print of the nails, and thrust my hand into his side, I will not believe." He gets called Doubting Thomas for it, which is unfair. He is asking for exactly what the other 10 had already been given. They were shown the hands and the side on the Sunday evening. He is not demanding special treatment. He is declining to accept second-hand what they accepted first-hand. 8 days later, Jesus comes again, and the first thing he does is offer Thomas precisely the test he asked for. "Reach hither thy finger, and behold my hands." There is no rebuke in it. The nearest thing to a reproach comes afterwards, and it is aimed past Thomas at everybody who would come later. "Blessed are they that have not seen, and yet have believed." And John records Thomas's answer, which is the highest thing anyone says about Jesus anywhere in the Gospel: "My Lord and my God." Then there is Peter, and this is the one I find hardest to read. He had denied knowing Jesus 3 times in a courtyard to a servant girl and 2 bystanders while the trial went on inside. Nothing in the resurrection accounts undoes that. He runs to the tomb, he sees the cloths, he goes home. The repair happens later, on a beach in Galilee, over breakfast. Jesus asks him 3 times whether he loves him, once for each denial, and Peter, grieved by the 3rd asking, says, "Lord, thou knowest all things. Thou knowest that I love thee." And each time the answer is a job. "Feed my lambs, feed my sheep." He is not forgiven and then set aside. He is forgiven and put back to work. Finally, the piece of evidence that sits outside the Gospels altogether and is older than all of them. Paul, writing to Corinth in the mid-50s, quotes what he calls something he received and delivered, the technical vocabulary for handing on a fixed formula. It lists the death, the burial, the resurrection on the 3rd day, and then the appearances. To Peter, to the 12, to over 500 at once, to James, and last to Paul himself. Most scholars, including skeptical ones, date that formula to within a very few years of the crucifixion. Some put it inside 5. Which means the claim was not a legend that grew over generations. It was circulating as a fixed creed, while the people named in it were still alive and reachable. And Paul adds the line that no fabricator writes, of whom the greater part remain unto this present, but some are fallen asleep. Most of the 500 are still living. The implication is unmistakable. Go and ask them. Before the explanations, one thing that trips a lot of careful readers, and it is worth clearing up because it looks like a contradiction and is not. Jesus said he would rise on the third day, and in one place, quoting Jonah, he says 3 days and 3 nights. But he died on Friday afternoon, and the tomb was empty by Sunday at dawn. That is not 72 hours. It is barely 36. The answer is that ancient Jewish reckoning counted inclusively. Any part of a day counted as a day. Friday afternoon is day 1, Saturday is day 2, Sunday morning is day 3. The rabbinic sources are explicit that a part of a day is reckoned as the whole. Nobody in the 1st century would have read 3 days as a stopwatch measurement, any more than we read a fortnight as exactly 336 hours. And the Jonah reference is doing something else anyway. Jesus does not offer it as a schedule. He offers it as the only sign this generation will get. As Jonah's was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. It is worth sitting with what a strange thing that is to say in advance. Jonah's story is a man swallowed by the sea, given up for dead, and returned, and then sent to preach to the people he least wanted saved. Jesus takes that as the pattern and applies it to himself, publicly, before any of it happens, in front of people who would remember the claim and be able to test it. Which is precisely why the chief priests requested a guard. Matthew says so directly, "Sir, we remember that deceiver said, while he was yet alive, 'After 3 days I will rise again.'" They had heard the prediction. They took it seriously enough to spend political capital, asking a Roman governor for soldiers over a dead man. The prediction is not a later addition read backwards into the story. It is attested by the actions of the people trying to prevent its fulfillment. It is worth taking the natural explanations seriously, one at a time, because the early opponents of Christianity took them seriously, and so should we. The body was stolen. This is the oldest counter-explanation, and the one Matthew records the authorities paying for. The difficulty is not the stone or the guard, it is the grave clothes and the aftermath. Thieves take the body as it lies. They do not unwrap a corpse set into 100 pounds of aromatic resin and leave the linen behind, folded. And a stolen body produces a group of men who know the truth. It does not produce a group of men who spend the rest of their lives being flogged, imprisoned, and executed for a claim they personally know to be false. People die for things they wrongly believe true all the time. They do not generally die for things they know they made up. They went to the wrong tomb. The women had watched the burial specifically. Mark says Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Hosannas, beheld where he was laid. And even granting a mistake at dawn, the correction is trivially available. Joseph of Arimathea owned the tomb. The authorities had every motive to produce the body, and Jerusalem is not large. A misidentified tomb is an error that survives about a day. He did not really die. The swoon theory asks a man to survive a Roman flogging and 6 hours of crucifixion, be certified dead by a professional execution squad, be sealed in a tomb without medical care for a day and a half, free himself from the wrappings, move a blocking stone from the inside, walk past a guard, and then present himself to his followers in a condition convincing enough that they concluded he had conquered death rather than that he urgently needed a doctor. It was a hallucination. This is the most serious of the four, and it fails on distribution. Hallucinations are private events. They do not occur to individuals and groups, indoors and outdoors, at meals and on roads, to believers and to skeptics like Thomas and hostile outsiders like James and Paul, over a period of weeks, in a form that includes eating fish and being touched. And a hallucination leaves the tomb occupied. It explains an experience. It does not explain an absence. None of that constitutes proof, and I would be suspicious of anyone claiming it does. What it does show is that the ordinary explanations are not free. Each one costs something, and the cost is usually paid by ignoring a detail the accounts were careful to include. Then there is the change in the people themselves, which is the piece of evidence that does not depend on any text being accurate about a stone. On the Friday, the movement was finished. The leader had been executed publicly in the manor room reserved for rebels and slaves, which in that culture was not merely a death but a verdict. A crucified Messiah was a contradiction in terms, a demonstration that God had not backed him. The followers ran. The senior one denied knowing him to a servant. On the Sunday morning, they were behind locked doors. Within a few weeks, the same men were standing in public in the same city, the one place where the claim was easiest to disprove and most dangerous to make, announcing that the man the authorities had executed 6 weeks earlier was alive. They kept saying it under arrest, under flogging, and in most of the traditions, under execution. Something happened between the locked room and the public square, and whatever it was had to be strong enough to reverse the meaning of a crucifixion, which is the single hardest thing that first-century Judaism had to accommodate. There is also the small matter of the day. Jewish practice had rested on the seventh day for centuries. It is written into the creation account and into the law, and it was among the most defining markers of the people. Within a generation, a movement made entirely of Jews had shifted its gathering to the first day of the week and called it the Lord's Day. That is not the sort of habit that drifts. It is the sort of thing that changes when something happened on a particular morning that people could not stop marking. So what do we do with that morning? The first thing is to notice that nobody in it behaves like a believer. The women bring spices for a corpse. Mary assumes theft twice and is unmoved by angels. Peter and John look and go home. The 11 dismiss the report as raving. Thomas refuses the testimony of 10 friends. There is no credulity anywhere in the account. Every single person in it starts from the ordinary explanation and has to be moved off it. The second is the grave clothes, which I keep returning to, not disturbed, not taken. The headcloth folded and set apart in its own place, in a tomb nobody had any reason to tidy. And the third is a woman standing in a garden, offering to carry a body she could not possibly lift, being asked why she was crying, and answering the question wrong 3 times until somebody said her name. That is how the most consequential news in the history of the world was first delivered. Not with an argument, not with a proof, but with one word to a person who had not stopped looking. And there is one more thing about that name, which only lands if you know where Mary Magdalene came from. Luke tells us, almost in passing, that she was a woman out of whom 7 devils had gone. Whatever precisely that describes, and the text does not elaborate, It marks her as someone who had been at the far edge of what her society could accommodate. Not a respected witness, not a person whose word would be taken anywhere. That is who is standing in the garden. And that is who is trusted with the message first and sent with it to the men who would go on to lead the church. The order of it is not incidental. The first person to see him is the one with the least standing to be believed, and the instruction given to her is go and tell. Whatever else the morning establishes, it establishes that. They thought somebody had taken the body. He had simply left the wrappings folded. There is a village 2 miles east of Jerusalem, close enough that you could walk it before the heat came up, and in that village there was a house where Jesus was welcome. Not tolerated, welcome. He had friends there, 2 sisters and their brother, and the Gospels tell us plainly that he loved them, which is a sentence worth stopping on because it is said about almost nobody else. And it is in that house, among the people he loved most outside his own circle, that he did the thing that finally got him killed. That is the strange shape of this story. The greatest miracle in the Gospel of John is not the one that saves him. It is the one that condemns him. From the moment Lazarus walks out of that tomb, the machinery starts moving, and it does not stop until there is a cross on a hill outside the city. But before any of that, there is a message, a short one. 2 sisters send word to a man several days' walk away, and what they send is not a request. It is not an instruction. It is 9 words in English, and it does not ask for anything at all. Lord, behold, he whom thou lovest is sick. They do not say come. They do not say heal him. They do not say hurry. They simply state a fact and let it sit, because they believe that stating it is enough, that this man, hearing this, will do what love does. There is a confidence in that message that is almost breathtaking. They are not negotiating, they are informing. And then Jesus does nothing. Not for an hour, not for a morning. The text is very careful here, and it is careful in a way that has troubled readers for 2,000 years. When he had heard, therefore, that he was sick, he abode 2 days still in the same place where he was. Read that again, because the grammar is doing something deliberate. Not although he heard, not but he stayed. When he had heard, therefore he stayed. The delay is not in spite of the news. The delay is because of it. That is the first hard thing in this chapter, and there is no getting around it. The sisters send for him. He hears. He waits. And by the time he begins the journey, the man they sent about is already dead. We should be honest about what that means, because the sisters certainly were. Both of them, separately, will say the same sentence to his face when he finally arrives. Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died. Martha says it, Mary says it. They have clearly been saying it to each other for 4 days in a house full of mourners, turning it over, and it is not a theological reflection. It is a wound with a name on it. Where were you? And Jesus does not deny the charge. He never says they are wrong about the facts. He does not say the sickness was too far gone, or that he was delayed on the road, or that there was nothing to be done. He accepts the premise entirely. If he had been there, Lazarus would not have died. Both sisters are correct. So the question the chapter forces is not whether he could have prevented it. The question is why he chose not to. He gives an answer, though it is not the kind of answer that comforts. This sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God might be glorified thereby. And later, more bluntly, to the disciples, I am glad for your sakes that I was not there, to the intent ye may believe. I am glad I was not there. That is a very difficult sentence to hold. He is glad, not resigned, not sorry it worked out that way. Glad. Because something was going to happen in that village that could not have happened if he had come when he was called, and he judged that thing to be worth 4 days of a family's grief. Whatever else you make of this chapter, do not soften that. The text does not soften it. There is a small exchange before they set out that is easy to read past, and it is one of the most human moments in the gospel. Jesus says to the disciples, Our friend Lazarus sleepeth, but I go that I may awake him out of sleep. And they answer with obvious relief, Lord, if he sleep, he shall do well. You can hear what they are doing. They do not want to go to Judea. They have just been arguing that Judea will kill him. And here is a sentence that lets them off. If the man is only sleeping, then the trip is unnecessary. The danger is unnecessary, and everyone can stay where they are. They seize on it. Sleep is good. Sleep means recovery. Let him rest. John, writing it down decades later, cannot resist stepping in to explain. Howbeit Jesus spake of his death, but they thought that he had spoken of taking of rest in sleep. And then Jesus, who has been speaking in the gentler register, drops it entirely. Then said Jesus unto them plainly, Lazarus is dead. Plainly, the word is there in the text because the contrast matters. He tried the soft version and it was misheard, perhaps deliberately misheard, so he says the hard thing without decoration. Lazarus is dead. There is no reading of that which permits them to stay home. It is worth noticing what he does not do. He does not rebuke them for the misunderstanding. He does not point out that they were reaching for an excuse. He simply removes the excuse and keeps walking. And there is something in that word, sleepeth, that the disciples missed and the early church did not. It becomes, very quickly, the ordinary Christian way of speaking about the dead. Paul uses it constantly. Those who sleep in Jesus, fallen asleep, we shall not all sleep. The word was not a euphemism for them, and it was not softening. It was a claim. It said, this condition is temporary, and there is someone who wakes people from it. The disciples heard sleep and thought recovery. Jesus meant sleep and thought resurrection. They were both talking about a state that ends. They simply disagreed enormously about who could end it. And then he says the sentence that shows he has understood the whole shape of what is about to happen, days before it happens. And I am glad for your sakes that I was not there, to the intent ye may believe. Glad for their sakes. He is telling them in advance that the 4 days are not an accident of the road and not a failure of timing. They are the point. Something is going to be shown at that tomb that could not have been shown at a sickbed, and the disciples are the ones it is being shown to. They still do not understand. They are not going to understand for some time. But he has told them plainly, twice now, and later, when they are trying to make sense of an empty tomb belonging to someone else, they will have this to remember. Now, the disciples are not thinking about any of this. They are thinking about geography. Because Bethany is 2 miles from Jerusalem, and Jerusalem, the last time they were there, had picked up stones. Master, they say, the Jews of late sought to stone thee, and goest thou thither again. They are not being cowardly, they are being accurate. The previous chapters have made it very clear that the city is no longer safe for him, that the authorities have moved from argument to intent, and that walking back toward Jerusalem is walking toward the thing that will kill him. Everyone in the group knows it. And then Thomas says something that has been unfairly forgotten, because Thomas has been reduced to one word, doubting, by centuries of shorthand. What he actually says here, when the others are hesitating, is this: "Let us also go, that we may die with him." That is not doubt. That is a man who has done the arithmetic, arrived at the worst answer, and decided to go anyway. He does not think this will end well. He thinks it will end in a grave, possibly several, and he says, "Fine, then we die together." Remember that the next time someone calls him Doubting Thomas, he was the first one in that group to say out loud that following this man might cost him everything, and to keep walking. So they go, and when they arrive, the situation is worse than a death. It is a death with an audience. Lazarus has been in the tomb 4 days. Bethany is close enough to the city that mourners have come out from Jerusalem in numbers. The text says many of the Jews came to Martha and Mary to comfort them. This is a public grief in a crowded house, watched by people who know exactly who Jesus is and exactly what the council in Jerusalem thinks of him. And the 4 days matter more than a modern reader might guess. There was a belief current at the time that the soul lingered near the body for 3 days, hoping to return, and departed on the 4th when decay set in. Whether or not the sisters held that belief, the number is doing work in the narrative. 4 days is past the last hope. 4 days is not a coma or a mistake or a swoon. 4 days is a body that has begun to change. The story is being placed, deliberately, on the far side of every possible explanation. Martha hears he is coming and goes out to meet him on the road. Mary stays in the house. That division tells you something about both of them, and Luke has already told us the same thing in a different scene. Martha busy, Martha moving, Martha the one who acts, Mary still, Mary at his feet. So Martha reaches him first and says her sentence, "Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died." But she does not stop there. She adds something stranger. "But I know that even now, whatsoever thou wilt ask of God, God will give it thee." Even now, 4 days in. She does not know what she is asking for. She cannot. Nobody has ever asked for this. But she has not closed the door. She is standing in a road outside a tomb saying, "It is too late, and also I have not stopped believing it might not be." Jesus says, "Thy brother shall rise again." And Martha, who has been to funerals, who knows the standard words of comfort, gives the standard answer. "I know that he shall rise again in the resurrection at the last day." She is being polite. She is receiving a condolence. Yes, of course, at the end of all things, we will all be raised. Thank you. And he interrupts that with the sentence, the whole chapter is built around. "I am the resurrection and the life. Not I will bring about the resurrection, not I know when it will happen. I am it." He takes a doctrine, a future event, safely distant, on a day nobody living will see, and pulls it into the road where they are standing and attaches it to himself. "He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die. Believest thou this?" And Martha, who has just been told something she cannot possibly have processed, says yes. "Yea, Lord, I believe that thou art the Christ, the Son of God, which should come into the world." She does not understand what is about to happen, but she answers the question in front of her honestly, with her brother still in the ground. That is worth more than a theologian's certainty. Then she goes back to the house and calls Mary secretly, and here the text does something almost cinematic. Mary rises quickly. The mourners see her go and assume she is going to the tomb to weep, so they follow her. And so a woman who was sent for quietly arrives with a crowd behind her, which means what happens next happens in front of witnesses, dozens of them, from Jerusalem, who will carry the account back into the city. Mary reaches him and falls at his feet and says the same sentence her sister said, "Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died." Word for word, they have been saying it to each other for 4 days. But the reaction is different this time, and the difference is the heart of the chapter. When Jesus therefore saw her weeping, and the Jews also weeping which came with her, he groaned in the spirit and was troubled. That word, groaned, is doing more work than English can carry. The Greek is a hard, physical word, used elsewhere of a hoarse snorting, of anger held in the chest. It is not gentle sympathy. Something in him reacts violently to what he is looking at. And then Jesus wept. 2 words, the shortest verse in the English Bible and the strangest, because he already knows how this ends. He said it on the road, "This sickness is not unto death." He told the disciples plainly that Lazarus would be woken. He has come here specifically to do this. He is minutes away from calling a dead man out of a tomb by name. So why cry? That question has produced a lot of bad answers. He was weeping for their unbelief, some say, but the text does not say that, and it sits badly next to a man who has just been told by both sisters that they still trust him. He was weeping for the world in general, say others, which is true enough to be useless. The simplest reading is the hardest one. He is standing in front of people he loves, in real pain, and their pain is not made unreal by the fact that it is about to end. Knowing the outcome does not cancel the grief. He is not weeping because the situation is hopeless. He is weeping because it is grievous, and those are different things, and we confuse them constantly. There is something else in that groan, too. He is looking at death, at what it does to a family, at a tomb with a stone across it, at sisters who have been crying for 4 days, and the reaction is not calm. It is closer to fury. Whatever else this scene is, it is not a man at peace with mortality. He is angry at it. And the crowd notices the tears. Behold how he loved him, some say, which is generous. But others say something sharper. Could not this man, which opened the eyes of the blind, have caused that even this man should not have died? They are asking Martha's question and Mary's question in public with an edge on it. If you can do what you say you can do, where were you? That accusation has followed him from the road to the tomb, said 3 times by 3 different voices, and he has still not answered it. He is about to. He comes to the tomb. It is a cave with a stone laid against it, and he says 4 words that change the tone of everything. Take ye away the stone. And Martha, Martha, who declared his identity on the road, who said she believed, objects. Lord, by this time he stinketh, for he hath been dead 4 days. I want to be fair to her, because she is easy to mock, and she does not deserve it. She is not failing a test. She is protecting her brother's dignity and her family's in front of a crowd, and she is being practical in exactly the way she is always practical. Confessing that a man is the Son of God is one thing. Opening your brother's grave in front of the neighbors is another. Belief and nerve are not the same thing, and this verse is the proof. He answers her gently, said I not unto thee, that if thou wouldest believe, thou shouldest see the glory of God, and the stone is moved. And then he prays out loud, and he tells us why he is doing it out loud. Father, I thank thee that thou hast heard me. And I knew that thou hearest me always, but because of the people which stand by I said it, that they may believe that thou hast sent me. That is an unusually candid thing to include. He is saying, this prayer is for you, not for me. He is not persuading God. He is showing a crowd where the power is coming from, because in a moment they are going to see something they will have to explain to themselves, and he wants the explanation on record first. Then he cries with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. 3 words in English. And the name matters. Augustine's old remark is worth repeating, that if he had not said the name, every grave in the world would have emptied. It is a joke, but it is pointing at something real. This is not a general command to death. It is one man, called by name, out of one tomb by someone who knows him. And he that was dead came forth, bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was bound about with a napkin. Picture it properly, because it is not the serene image of the paintings. A man wrapped in linen strips, his face covered, standing in the mouth of a cave, unable to see or walk properly. Whatever happened inside that tomb, what comes out is alive and bound and blind, and it cannot free itself. And Jesus says the last words of the scene, and they are not addressed to Lazarus at all. Loose him and let him go. He does the thing only he can do, and then he hands the rest to the people standing there. He calls him out. They unwrap him. There is a division of labor in that sentence that is worth sitting with. The miracle is his, the unbinding is theirs, and he does not do their part for them. Now, the aftermath, which is where this chapter stops being a miracle story and becomes the beginning of the end. Then many of the Jews which came to Mary and had seen the things which Jesus did, believed on him. Of course they did. They had come out from Jerusalem to a funeral and watched a 4-day corpse walk into the daylight. But some of them went their ways to the Pharisees and told them what things Jesus had done. And the council meets, and the minutes of that meeting, as John records them, contain one of the most revealing sentences in the Gospels. What do we? For this man doeth many miracles. Not is this true, not did it happen, not how do we test it. They accept the miracle as fact and treat it as a problem. Their difficulty is not that he is a fraud. Their difficulty is that he is not. And the reasoning that follows is entirely practical and entirely understandable, and that is what makes it terrible. If we let him thus alone, all men will believe on him, and the Romans shall come and take away both our place and our nation. They are not monsters in this room. They are administrators of an occupied country doing risk assessment. Rome tolerates the temple and the council so long as the province stays quiet. A popular figure gathering crowds outside Jerusalem is the precise shape of the thing that brings the legions. They have seen it before. They are trying to prevent a massacre. And so Caiaphas, the high priest that year, says the sentence that hangs over everything after it. It is expedient for us that one man should die for the people, and that the whole nation perish not. He means it politically. He means, better one troublemaker than a war. It is cold arithmetic, and he says it out loud in a room full of colleagues who do not object. And John, writing decades later, adds a note that turns it inside out. And this spake he not of himself, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus should die for that nation. The man arranging the execution states the doctrine of the atonement without knowing it. He is right about the words and wrong about everything underneath them. One man will die for the people. That much is true. It is simply not true in the way he means it, and he will never understand what he said. Then from that day forth, they took counsel together for to put him to death. That is the line. That is where the chapter lands. Not on the resurrection, not on the sisters' joy, not on Lazarus sitting at a table eating a meal, though John will show us that later. It lands on a committee deciding to kill him, and the reason they give is the miracle itself. He raised a man from the dead, and it cost him his life. There is one more person in this story who never speaks, and it is worth stopping on him before we go any further, because the gospel is oddly silent about the one man everything happened to. Lazarus says nothing, not a word, not in the tomb, not coming out of it, not afterwards. He is the subject of the greatest sign in the book, and he is given no line at all. Every other person in the chapter speaks: Martha at length, Mary once, Thomas, the disciples, the crowd, the council, Caiaphas. The man who was dead is silent from beginning to end. And people have always wanted to fill that silence. There are whole traditions built on it, later stories about what he saw, what he remembered, whether he ever smiled again. All of them are inventions. John gives us nothing, and I think the nothing is deliberate. If Lazarus had described what he saw, this chapter would be about the afterlife. Because he does not, it stays about Jesus. The next chapter does show him once more, and the detail is quietly devastating. There is a supper at Bethany, and Lazarus is sitting at the table, eating with the people who buried him. That is all. No lecture, no testimony, no crowds gathered to interview him. A man having dinner with his sisters. And then this: the chief priests consulted that they might put Lazarus also to death, because that by reason of him many of the Jews went away and believed on Jesus. They planned to kill him again. Think about what that means as a piece of reasoning. Here is a man who is walking evidence, and their response is not to examine the evidence, but to remove it. He had become inconvenienced simply by being alive, and the solution proposed was to undo the miracle by force. It tells you that the council's problem was never really doubt. You do not silence a witness whose testimony you believe to be false. You silence one you believe. Now there is a question people ask about this chapter that deserves a straight answer rather than a pious deflection, and it is this: why him? Why Lazarus, and not the thousands of others who died that year in Judea? Why this family in this village on this particular week? Widows buried sons before and after. Nobody called them out of their tombs. The honest answer is that the gospel does not tell us, and any answer we supply is our own. What it does tell us is what the sign was for, that they may believe that thou hast sent me. This was not a reward for the sisters' faith, and it was not a general policy about death being reversed on request. It was a demonstration, done once, in a place where it would be seen and reported. That is uncomfortable, because it means Lazarus was chosen for something rather than saved from something. He got his life back as a byproduct of an argument being made in public. And yet, read the chapter again, Nobody in it treats him as a prop. Jesus weeps at his grave. The sisters are met on the road and answered by name. The love is not diminished by the fact that the moment also carried a larger weight. Both things are true at once, and we are usually too impatient to hold both. There is also something worth noticing about how the miracle is done, because it is almost aggressively unimpressive as a piece of theater. He does not touch the body. He does not enter the tomb. There is no gesture, no object, no ritual, no material of any kind. He tells other people to move the stone. He speaks a name, and he tells other people to do the unwrapping. Compare that to the healings elsewhere: clay and spittle for the blind man, a hand on the leper, the hem of a garment. Here, at the largest moment, there is less than anywhere else. Just a voice and a name, and the thing is done. And then the grave clothes, which are the detail that most repays attention. He came forth bound hand and foot. Whatever the mechanics of that were, how a man wrapped in linen strips crosses the floor of a cave, John does not explain, and the strangeness is left standing. But the theological point of it is unmissable when you set it beside what happens later. When they come to the tomb on the Sunday morning, the linen is lying there, folded, empty. Lazarus came out wearing his grave. Jesus left his behind. One man was given his life back and would need those cloths again. The other walked out of them permanently. John knows exactly what he is doing by putting those two tombs 8 chapters apart, and he is trusting the reader to notice without being told. Which brings us back to the delay and to the 4 days, and to a sentence that reads very differently at the end of this chapter than it did at the beginning. I am glad for your sakes that I was not there. He waited. And because he waited, a man was dead long enough that nobody could explain it away, and a crowd from Jerusalem was present to see it, and the news traveled straight back into the city, and the council met, and the decision was made. The delay produced the witnesses produced the report produced the death sentence. None of that is accidental. He walked toward Jerusalem knowing what was there. The disciples told him. The stones were still in the street, and he did the one thing guaranteed to make the authorities act. There is a symmetry in it that is almost unbearable. He gives life to his friend, and it costs him his own. The tomb at Bethany opens, and a few weeks later another tomb outside the city closes, with him inside it. And the words he said on the road to Martha, which must have sounded like consolation at the time, turn out to be a statement of what he is about to do personally. I am the resurrection and the life. He does not say it as a promise about the future. He says it standing in a road outside a grave, and then he proves it on someone else's brother, and then he goes and proves it on himself. One last thing, because it is easy to miss and it matters. Lazarus died again. Whatever years he had after that day, they ended. This was not immortality, it was a reprieve. There is a grave somewhere with his name on it for the second time, and no gospel records it, and nobody wept over it in Scripture. Which means the miracle at Bethany was never really about Lazarus. It was a demonstration, a thing done once, in public, in front of witnesses, so that when the same claim was made a few weeks later about a different tomb, there would be people alive who had already seen it work. He raised one man to show what he meant. Then he did the thing he was showing. And the sisters who sent that message, who wrote 9 words and waited 4 days and buried their brother and said, "Where were you to his face?" were, in the end, given an answer. Not the answer they asked for, not on the schedule they wanted, but an answer that outlasted their grief and their brother's second grave and every reasonable expectation they had when they sent for him. He was not late. He was doing something larger than the thing they asked for, and it looked exactly like absence while it was happening. That is the hardest comfort in Scripture, and it is still the comfort. 3 men came down off a mountain in the north of Galilee and did not say a word about what they had seen for somewhere between 6 months and 40 years. That is not a guess. 2 of the 3 eventually wrote it down, decades later, as old men, and one of them was still insisting near the end of his life that he had not made it up. We were eyewitnesses of his majesty. We were with him in the Holy Mount. He writes it like a man who has spent 30 years being told he imagined it. Whatever happened up, there was the single strangest thing these men ever witnessed, and they were the same men who watched a dead friend walk out of a tomb. It outranked that, and yet the instruction they were given as they walked back down was to keep it to themselves. Tell the vision to no man, until the Son of Man be risen again from the dead. So they kept it. Mark, who almost certainly got his gospel from Peter, adds a small human detail that gives the whole thing away. They kept that saying with themselves, questioning one with another what the rising from the dead should mean. They obeyed. They just had no idea what they were obeying or why, or what the deadline meant. 3 grown men walking down a mountain path, arguing in low voices about a sentence they did not understand. This is the story of what they saw. It begins 6 days earlier and about 25 miles to the south with a question. Jesus had taken the 12 up into the region of Caesarea Philippi, which is worth pausing on, because he did not pick that place by accident. Caesarea Philippi sat at the foot of Mount Hermon, at the source of the Jordan, and it was one of the most aggressively pagan places in the whole territory. There was a cave there sacred to the god Pan, a great gaping mouth in the cliff face that the locals believed opened onto the underworld. Niches were cut into the rock around it for statues of the gods. Herod's son Philip had rebuilt the town and named it for the emperor and for himself, so the very name of the place was a monument to Roman power and family ambition, stacked one on top of the other. That is where Jesus stops, turns to 12 Galilean men and asks, "Whom do men say that I the Son of Man am?" They give him the polling data. Some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, some say Jeremiah or one of the prophets, all flattering, all wrong. Every one of those answers puts him in a category that already exists. Then he narrows it, "But whom say ye that I am?" And Peter, who is so often the first to speak and so often wrong, is right. "Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." It is the high point of Peter's life to that moment. Jesus tells him so. "Blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood hath not revealed it unto thee, but my Father which is in heaven. And upon this rock, and the gates of hell shall not prevail, and the keys of the kingdom." Peter has just been handed the biggest commendation any human being receives in the Gospels. And then, in the very next breath, the bottom drops out. From that time forth began Jesus to show unto his disciples how that he must go unto Jerusalem and suffer many things of the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and be raised again the 3rd day. It is the first time he has said it plainly. No parable, no veiled saying about a temple being destroyed and raised in 3 days, just the itinerary. Jerusalem, suffering, death. Then, almost as an afterthought that nobody hears, resurrection. Peter cannot bear it. He takes Jesus aside, physically pulls him out of the group, which tells you how confident he is feeling after the last 5 minutes, and rebukes him. "Be it far from thee, Lord, this shall not be unto thee." And he receives the harshest sentence Jesus ever speaks to a friend. "Get thee behind me, Satan. Thou art an offense unto me. For thou savourest not the things that be of God, but those that be of men." Understand the whiplash here. Within a few verses, Peter has gone from the rock on which the church will be built to a mouthpiece for the enemy. Not because his theology of who Jesus is has failed. He got that right. Because his theology of what Jesus came to do has failed completely. He believes in a Messiah. He simply cannot hold a Messiah and a cross in the same thought. Then Jesus turns to all of them and makes it worse. "If any man will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whosoever will save his life shall lose it." Take up his cross. In 1st century Galilee, that is not a metaphor about a difficult marriage or a demanding job. Everyone listening has seen a man carry a crossbeam through a town, because that is what the Romans made a condemned man do, and everyone knows what waits at the end of the walk. Jesus has just told 12 men that following him is a death sentence. And then nothing happens for 6 days. All 3 Gospels mark the interval, which is unusual. The Gospel writers are generally indifferent to exact chronology. Matthew and Mark say 6 days. Luke says about 8 days after. They agree that a specific, countable gap sat between the announcement of the cross and what came next. Try to feel those 6 days. The most authoritative man they have ever met has just told them the mission ends with his execution. He has not softened it, he has not been talked out of it, and he has told them the same road is theirs. There is nothing in the text about what was said during those 6 days, which may be the most honest detail in it, because probably very little was said at all. Then after 6 days, Jesus taketh Peter, James, and John his brother, and bringeth them up into an high mountain apart. 3 men out of 12. This is the inner circle, and it is the same 3 every time something enormous happens. The raising of Jairus' daughter, this, and later Gethsemane. 2 of them are the sons of Zebedee, the pair Jesus nicknamed Boanerges, sons of thunder, which is not a name you give to quiet men. One is the man who was called Satan 6 days ago. That is worth sitting with for a moment. If you had just told your closest friend he was speaking for the devil, would you take him up the mountain the following week? Jesus did. Whatever the rebuke was, it was not a demotion. Peter is not being punished. He is being taken somewhere he needs to see. Which mountain is one of the oldest arguments in Christian geography. The traditional answer, going back at least to the 4th century, is Mount Tabor, a striking dome of a hill rising out of the Jezreel Valley. The problem with Tabor is that it is not very high, about 1,800 feet, and in the 1st century, there was almost certainly a fortified settlement on the summit, which makes it a poor choice for privacy. The other candidate is Mount Hermon, and Hermon has the geography on its side. It stands over 9,000 feet, snow-capped for much of the year, and it is directly above Caesarea Philippi, where the previous scene took place. 6 days is exactly the sort of gap that lets a group travel from the town to the slopes. The text says an high mountain apart, and Hermon is the high mountain of that entire region. visible for 50 miles in any direction? We do not know. The Gospels do not name it, and the fact that they do not is itself a small argument that the location was not the point. Peter, writing decades later, does not name it either. He calls it the Holy Mount and leaves it there. What we do know is that they climbed. Luke, the doctor, is the one who tells us why they went up. He went up into a mountain to pray. That was the purpose. Not to stage a revelation, to pray. Luke adds that the transfiguration happened as he prayed. The change came in the middle of the praying, not before it. And Luke tells us something else, quietly, that no one ever remembers. Peter and they that were with him were heavy with sleep. They fell asleep. Of course they did. They had climbed a mountain, it was likely evening, and these were tired men carrying 6 days of bad news. The three who will later fall asleep in Gethsemane are already asleep here. The pattern is set long before the garden. Whatever they saw it half-woken, hauled up out of sleep into something their eyes were not built for. Then it happens, and every writer reaches for a different set of words, because none of them has the right ones. Matthew, and was transfigured before them, and his face did shine as the sun, and his raiment was white as the light. Mark, and his raiment became shining, exceeding white as snow, so as no fuller on earth can white them. Luke, the fashion of his countenance was altered, and his raiment was white and glistering. The Greek word behind transfigured is metamorphos. It is where we get metamorphosis. It does not mean he was covered in light or lit from outside. It means the form itself changed, that what he looked like altered to match what he actually was. This is the crucial thing about this story, and the reason it is not simply a light show. Nothing was added to Jesus on that mountain. Something was uncovered. For 3 years, these men had been looking at a Galilean carpenter with dust on his feet. For a few minutes on that summit, the disguise came off. And notice how each writer strains at it. Matthew says his face shone like the sun, the brightest thing he can name. Mark, characteristically the most earthbound of the four, goes for something a working man would understand, whiter than any launderer could bleach them. That is not a poetic image. That is a man saying, I have seen white cloth. I know what the best white in the world looks like, and it was not that. Mark is describing a color by admitting the color does not exist. Then 2 men are standing there who should not be. Behold, there appeared unto them Moses and Elias talking with him. Moses and Elijah, 2 figures out of the deep past of Israel, and they are not chosen at random. Between them, they represent the entire structure of the Hebrew Scriptures. Moses is the law, Elijah is the prophets. The law and the prophets is the standard phrase for the whole of Scripture. And here, the whole of Scripture is standing on a mountainside, having a conversation with a carpenter. There is a second thing they have in common that is stranger. Both men had unusual endings. Moses died on Mount Nebo, and the text says that God buried him, and no man knoweth of his sepulchre unto this day. Elijah did not die at all. He was taken up in a whirlwind, with chariots of fire, in front of his successor Elisha. 2 men whose exits from the world were irregular. 2 men who, in the traditions that had grown up around them, were expected back. And both of them had met God on a mountain. Moses on Sinai, where his own face shone so brightly afterwards that he had to veil it. Elijah on Horeb, in the cave, where he waited through the wind and the earthquake and the fire and heard the still small voice. These are the two men in all of Israel's history who had stood in that place. Now they are standing on another mountain, and the light is not on their faces, it is on his. That contrast is not incidental, and the first readers would have felt it immediately, because there is a scene in Exodus that this one is deliberately standing next to. Moses comes down from Sinai, carrying the second set of tablets, and he does not know that his face is shining. That is the detail the text insists on. Moses wist not that the skin of his face shone while he talked with him. He has been in the presence of God for 40 days, and something has come off on him, and he is the only person on the mountain who cannot see it. Aaron and all the children of Israel look at him and are afraid to come near. So Moses does something practical. He speaks to them, delivers what he was given, and then he puts a veil over his face. And every time he goes back in to speak with God, he takes the veil off, and every time he comes out to the people, he puts it back on. That is the arrangement Israel lived with. The glory was real, but it was borrowed, and it was mediated, and it had to be covered up. Paul, writing to Corinth, picks at that veil and finds something underneath it that is not flattering. He points out what Exodus does not quite say out loud. The shine faded. Moses veiled his face, Paul argues, so that the children of Israel could not steadfastly look to the end of that which is abolished. The covering was not only to protect them from the brightness, it was also so that nobody would watch the brightness go out. Because it did go out, Moses had to go back up and be filled again. Whatever was on his face was reflected light, the way the moon is bright, which is to say, not by itself. Hold that next to the mountain in Galilee. Jesus does not come down glowing from a meeting. He is transfigured in the middle of praying, in front of 3 witnesses, and the light is described as coming out of him rather than settling on him. His face did shine as the sun, not like a face that has been near the sun, like the sun. And there is no veil, nobody covers him. When the glory recedes, it is not because it has faded and needs renewing. It is put away deliberately, the way you close a door. Moses could not stop his face from shining and could not keep it shining. Jesus does both at will. Paul draws the conclusion in a sentence that would have been outrageous to his own former self. For even that which was made, glorious, had no glory in this respect, by reason of the glory that excelleth. The glory of Sinai was real. It is simply not in the same category. And here is the part that the mountain makes physical. Moses is standing there while this happens. The man with the veil is looking at the man with the light. Whatever conclusion Paul reached about the fading and the abiding, Moses reached it first, on that summit, in person, and then he stepped back and left the field to him. Which is exactly what the voice from the cloud is about to say, in 4 words, to 3 men who had not yet worked out that the light and the shadow on that mountain were not equal partners. Luke alone tells us what they were talking about, and it is the detail that unlocks the whole scene. Who appeared in glory and spake of his decease, which he should accomplish at Jerusalem. His decease, the Greek word Luke uses there is exodos, his exodus. The word is not an accident, and Luke did not pick it for elegance. Moses is standing right there, the man who led the Exodus, who brought a nation out of slavery through water and into a wilderness. And the conversation is about the Exodus Jesus is going to accomplish at Jerusalem. That is what they discussed on the mountain of glory, not the kingdom, not the miracles, not strategy, the cross. 6 days after Peter was told he was speaking for Satan when he tried to talk Jesus out of dying, Jesus goes up a mountain and discusses that exact death with Moses and Elijah in glory as the thing he came to accomplish. Peter is watching this, and Peter, awake now and terrified and unable to bear silence, says something. "Master, it is good for us to be here, and let us make 3 tabernacles, one for thee, and one for Moses, and one for Elias. 3 shelters, 3 booths." The word is the one used for the temporary shelters Israel built during the Feast of Tabernacles, when they lived in huts for a week to remember 40 years in the wilderness. Peter is reaching for the only category he has. Something holy is happening. Holy things need a structure. Let us build. And both Mark and Luke, who are not in the business of embarrassing the leader of the early church, add the same devastating footnote. Mark, for he wist not what to say, for they were sore afraid. Luke, not knowing what he said. There may be a simpler reason. The idea was in his head at all. Several scholars have noticed that the timing places this close to the Feast of Tabernacles, when every family in Israel was building exactly that kind of shelter out of branches. If the hills were already dotted with booths that week, Peter was not inventing a ritual. He was reaching for the nearest thing to hand. He did not know what he was saying. He said it because he was frightened, and the silence was unbearable. Anyone who has ever filled a terrible quiet with words they regretted knows exactly what Peter did on that mountain. But there is something wrong underneath the babbling, and it is not the fear. It is the arithmetic, 3 tabernacles, 1 each. Peter has just put Jesus on a level with Moses and Elijah, the greatest men in the history of his people, but men. 6 days after confessing that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, he is offering him a third of the accommodation. He is not being disrespectful. He is being generous by his lights. That is the trouble with it. And while he yet spake, Matthew is explicit that the interruption cuts him off mid-sentence. Behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them. The cloud. Anyone raised on those scriptures knows what a cloud means on a mountain. It is the pillar of cloud that led Israel through the desert. It is the cloud that filled the tabernacle so thickly that Moses could not enter. It is the cloud that settled on Sinai for 6 days before God spoke on the 7th. The rabbis had a word for it, the Shekinah, the dwelling presence. It is the visible sign that God has arrived and is not going to be looked at directly. Luke says they feared as they entered into the cloud, not as they saw it, as they entered it. Whatever else that cloud was, it was something you could be inside. And out of the cloud, a voice. "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear ye him." There are only 3 occasions in the Gospels where the Father speaks aloud, and this is the second. The first was at the Jordan at the baptism, and the words are almost identical. "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." Almost. On this mountain, 3 words are added, and those 3 words are the entire point of the event. Hear ye him. Listen to him, not to Moses standing beside him, not to Elijah, not to Peter's building plans, him. This is a direct answer to a question nobody had the courage to ask out loud. 6 days earlier, Jesus had said he was going to Jerusalem to be killed, and Peter had said, in effect, "No, you are not." Now the voice from the cloud settles the argument. When he tells you he is going to die, listen to him. He is not confused. He is not being defeatist. He knows exactly what he is doing, and you do not. There is also a phrase buried in Hear Ye Him that any Jewish listener would catch immediately. In Deuteronomy, Moses tells the people that God will raise up a prophet like him from among their brethren, and adds, Unto him ye shall hearken. Same construction. Same command. The voice on the mountain is saying, This is the one Moses told you about. The man who wrote those words is standing right here, and he agrees. The disciples' reaction is not wonder. Matthew, and when the disciples heard it, they fell on their face and were sore afraid. Face down on the rock, not one of the three is left standing. There is nothing in this story about a beautiful spiritual experience or a warm sense of the presence. Three men are lying flat on a mountainside with their faces in the dirt because the voice of God has spoken about 30 feet away, and they are certain they are about to die. And then comes the sentence that I think is the tenderest in the whole passage, and it is almost always skipped over on the way to the theology. And Jesus came and touched them, and said, Arise, and be not afraid. He came and touched them. He does not shout from a distance. He does not let the terror do its work. He crosses the ground, and he puts a hand on each of them, and he tells them to get up. This is a man who moments ago was shining like the sun in conversation with the two greatest figures of their scriptures. And the first thing he does afterwards is walk over to his frightened friends and touch them on the shoulder. And when they had lifted up their eyes, they saw no man save Jesus only. Jesus only. Moses is gone. Elijah is gone. The cloud has lifted. The light has gone out of his face. And the man standing in front of them is the one they came up the hill with, dusty, ordinary, entirely himself. 3 tabernacles will not be needed. That phrase, Jesus only, is the residue of the whole event. Everything else was scaffolding. The law and the prophets appeared, testified, and withdrew, and what was left standing was him. They come down the mountain, and on the way down he gives the order, Tell the vision to no man, until the Son of Man be risen again from the dead. Why the silence? Partly because it could not be understood before the resurrection. A story about a shining Messiah told to a nation waiting for a military deliverer would have set fire to exactly the expectation Jesus was trying to dismantle. There would have been a crowd on that mountain within a week. He had already had to escape once when they tried to make him king by force. But partly, I think, because glory without the cross is a lie about him. If those 3 had gone down and told everyone what they saw, the story would have stopped there at the light, and the light was not the destination. It was fuel for the road to Jerusalem, a road that ends in the dark. On the way down, they ask him a question that has clearly been troubling them since Elijah vanished. Why then say the scribes that Elias must first come? They know Malachi. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. If the Messiah is here, where was Elijah's advance work? And Jesus tells them, Elias is come already, and they knew him not, but have done unto him whatsoever they listed. Likewise shall also the Son of Man suffer of them. Then the disciples understood that he spake unto them of John the Baptist. John, who was at that moment already dead, beheaded in a fortress by a weak king at a birthday party over a promise made in front of guests. That is what the forerunner got. Jesus has just been glorified on a mountain, and the first thing he does coming down is point at a murdered prophet and say, They did not recognize him either, and the same is coming for me. And then they reach the bottom and walk straight into chaos. A crowd is arguing. The other 9 disciples are in the middle of it, losing. A father pushes forward with a boy who has been convulsing since childhood, thrown into fire and water, and says, "I brought him to thy disciples, and they could not cure him." From the Shekinah cloud to a failed exorcism and a shouting match in the space of a morning. That is the shape of the story, and it is deliberate. The mountain is not an escape from the valley. It is the reason he can walk back into it. Now go forward 30-odd years. Peter is an old man. He is writing what he seems to know is his last letter. He is trying to convince a church that the things they have been taught are not stories that got out of hand. For we have not followed cunningly devised fables when we made known unto you the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, but were eyewitnesses of his majesty. For he received from God the Father honor and glory, when there came such a voice to him from the excellent glory, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." And this voice which came from heaven we heard, when we were with him in the holy mount. Of everything Peter saw in 3 years, the walking on water, the feeding of the thousands, the empty tomb, this is the memory he reaches for when he needs to prove that it was real. Not the resurrection, the mountain. And he quotes the voice exactly. 3 decades on, an old man in a hostile city, and he still has the words in order. There is a detail in his version worth catching. He does not say we saw, he says we heard. This voice which came from heaven we heard. The light was extraordinary, but the light was not what convinced him. What stayed with Peter for 30 years was the sentence, "Hear ye him." The man who had been told to listen spent the rest of his life doing it, and died, according to every early account, on a cross of his own outside Rome. He had been warned about that too, on a beach, by the same voice in a plainer register. So what do we do with a story like this? A mountain we cannot locate, a light nobody can describe, 2 dead men holding a conversation. Start with what it was for. It was not for the crowds. They were never told. It was not, in any obvious way, for Jesus. He did not need convincing. It was for 3 exhausted, frightened men who had just been told that the person they had staked their lives on was going to be executed, and who were about to spend the worst week of their lives watching exactly that happen. They were given one look, one. Not an explanation, not a way out of the suffering, a look at who he actually was, to hold on to when everything else came apart. It did not work immediately. Peter denied him anyway. James and John ran with the rest of them. The mountain did not make them brave that night. But it held. 30 years later, when Peter needed something solid to stand on, that was the rock he stood on. And the command from the cloud has not changed and has not softened. It was not admire him. It was not build something for him. It was listen to him, including, and especially, when what he says is the thing you least want to hear. Peter's whole failure 6 days earlier was refusing to accept a sentence he did not like from a person he knew to be right. There is one more thing, and it is the smallest thing in the passage. When the glory had gone and the voice had stopped and 3 men were face down in the dirt, unable to move, he came and touched them. That is the same man. The one shining like the sun, and the one crossing the rock to put a hand on a frightened friend's shoulder are not 2 different people, and the mountain exists to prove it. He is not less glorious in the touch. He is not less approachable in the glory. Arise and be not afraid. They got up, they walked down, they said nothing for years. And when they finally spoke, this is what they said. We saw him. For a few minutes on a mountain, we saw him as he is. And then we went back down into the noise with him, because that was where he was going.